we will begin by explaining how the price of the factors of production is determined. First, I will offer a very brief introduction. In a market economy, the price of consumer goods and services is determined based on a social process driven by the force of entrepreneurship, which is the capacity all men and women have to recognize what interests them, what is worthwhile to them, and what they value. That is, to notice the profit opportunities which arise around them, and act accordingly to take advantage of them. In two-sided competition, that process tends to result in a price which lies between what are known as the subjective valuations of the marginal pairs. Today, we will consider how a price is determined, not the price of consumer goods and services, but the price of the factors of production involved in the making of consumer goods and services. So, today we will discuss how the price of what Menger calls economic goods of highest order, or factors of production, is determined. We have defined such goods as those which, unlike consumer goods and services, do not directly satisfy human needs, but require the involvement of other productive factors, and, in the end, indirectly yield a consumer good, following a production process that takes time. A consumer good would be, for instance, a bottle of mineral water or a movie ticket. And a factor of production would be the manufacturing plant where the bottles of mineral water are filled, or the film projector used to show the movie. Or, going back further, iron ore extracted from a mine for treatment and conversion into steel, etc. In short, any stage prior to final consumption. Today, we will see how the price of productive factors is determined, that is, the price of those economic goods which are not found in the final stage of consumption, but in earlier stages. Productive factors do not directly satisfy human needs, but contribute, together with other goods, to the creation of consumer goods, throughout a production process which takes time. The essential idea is that it is the price of consumer goods which determines, indirectly and by a highly complex entrepreneurial process, the price of the factors of production. In other words, if in the market people pay a price for bricks, and also for iron, and to rent a manufacturing plant, and if a computer has a price, and computer programs, and communication equipment, and a tractor or a caterpillar, they do not have a price, because we can eat these factors of production, and they directly satisfy our needs. They have a price because they contribute to the eventual production of consumer goods at the end of a period of varying length, goods such as the apartment we live in, or the car we drive, goods we value and for which we pay a high price. So, when you see that iron ore and computers and bricks have a price, remember that it is because they help to produce the consumer goods we value and pay a price for. To put it another way, the prices of productive factors are indirectly determined by the prices of consumer goods. Or, as I have repeated several times in class, a statement that always comes as a big shock, especially to those who are not experts on the subject. Costs follow prices, and not the other way around. Huerta, a German economist, typically gives this example. If we expect to sell a consumer good, for instance a designer hat, for 100 euros, we will be willing, as entrepreneurs, to take on costs today of up to an amount under 100 euros, to be spent on labor, design, materials, etc., to produce the consumer good. All of this takes place in an entrepreneurial environment of uncertainty. We may make a mistake and incur costs exceeding the amount at which we can sell, and then we will sustain losses. But we all act with the intention of making a profit. We are willing to make an outlay today of the price of productive factors. That is, we incur costs because we expect that in the future, when the production process culminates, and those factors have been transformed into final consumer goods and services which consumers can buy, we will be able to sell them at a price that permits us to recover all the costs we have taken on, and also leaves us the highest possible margin of pure entrepreneurial profit. So, we begin with the essential idea that the prices of productive factors tend to follow the estimated future prices of consumer goods, and not the other way around. And today, we are going to go a step further and examine how the price of the factors of production is determined. This is very important because the stages prior to consumption, remember the triangular diagrams we studied when we were discussing capital theory in the book Money, Bank Credit and Economic Cycles, from the standpoint of billing, productive effort and the employment of workers, the stages prior to consumption are the most numerous and significant of the entire economy. The vast majority of us devote our effort to these stages. Another reason today's class is very important is that one of the most crucial factors of production is the factor known as labor. This is actually an inappropriate term because there is no such thing as a uniform, homogeneous labor factor. There are an almost infinite constellation of different kinds of labor. Workers specialized in certain types of building, engineers who operate milling machines, quantity surveyors, architects. There are a huge array of workers, and each makes his or her own small contribution to the production process in these prior stages. The price of the services of labor is called a wage. Therefore, today, when we consider how the price of productive factors in general is determined, we will consider how wages in particular are determined, because, as workers, we are a factor of production. Furthermore, the very laws we are going to examine today also explain how the prices of other factors of production are determined. For example, the price of natural resources, the rent paid on an apartment used as a law office or by a management firm, the rent paid on the property where a factory is located, or the cost of renting a computer, which is also a factor of production. The market price of all of these services or factors of production is what we are going to determine today. So today's lesson is very important. To understand how the price of the factors of production is determined, we must begin by grasping a few essential preliminary concepts. Take good note, all of you. First, a specific factor of production is one which can be used in only one particular line of production. Second, in contrast, we will define a non-specific factor of production as one which is useful in several different lines of production. In other words, a non-specific factor of production is versatile. One of the most typical examples of such a factor is the labor factor. Believe it or not, your professor can do quite a few things, though I am better at some than at others. For instance, I can teach economics. I can also sweep and clean a house, and change a baby's diaper. I'm not very good at that last one, though. The smell makes me queasy, and I keel over. I am pretty clumsy and hopeless at it. But one of the special characteristics of human beings, men and women, is that we are very rarely a specific factor, able to do only one particular task. There are extreme cases, but most of us can do different kinds of things, though we do some better than others. It is true that we probably like and feel drawn to certain fields, and find certain types of work easier than others, but we can do different things. Well, the third concept we will introduce is that of an isolable factor of production. An isolable factor of production is one which can be separated from the others involved in production. I say this because in different situations in the market, we encounter specific factors of production, which can be used for only one thing. And in other situations we encounter, and this is our fourth concept, non-isolable factors of production, which must always be accompanied by other factors in order to fulfill their productive function. For instance, consumers view the Spanish comedy duos Cruz and Raya, Martes and Trece, and Tip and Col as single units, and their members as non-isolable factors of production. Cruz could conceivably become a successful comedian independently of Raya, or Tip independently of Col, but it would not be the same. Tip and Col Martes and Trece, and Cruz and Raya are products, and their members are non-isolable factors of production. Now, I will set out the essential principle, or the economic law of tendency, which explains or determines the value, the market price, which tends to be established for the factors of production. I will show that, without anyone's direction from above, without any order from a government department or planning agency, nor any decree, an extremely powerful force exists in the market, and is driven by the entrepreneurship of each and every one of the participants. That is, the billions of men and women who make up the economy. And this force determines that each person, each factor of production, tends to be paid the value of the contribution that factor makes to the production process. I repeat, we will arrive at the conclusion that in the market, each of us tends to be paid the value of what we contribute to the process of production. That is an inexorable law of tendency, which rests on the force of the entrepreneurship of all the participants in the market, and I will explain and demonstrate this law. It should be a source of satisfaction for everyone, because we will conclude that the more we contribute to the production process, the greater the value of what we contribute to the process of social cooperation, the more we will be paid. That is the law of tendency. So, before we go into detail, if I want to get a job, what should I do? I should never ask how much the job pays. I should arrive at the interview and say, "Mr. or Mrs. Interviewer, I have come to this company with just one goal in mind, to do everything I can to solve problems for you and make your life easier. I plan to contribute all my effort to achieving this company's objectives. In other words, I am here to give something to this company, and I am not worried at all about what you are going to pay me, because you will see the contribution I am going to make, and you will pay me what I am worth." Granted, when employees start at a company, they are pretty clueless. They have very little experience, knowledge, and practice. For the first few months, it would almost make more sense for employees to pay the company, since time is spent teaching them, etc. But that is an investment a company makes in its employees. And if we are enthusiastic people who consider it a privilege to be able to work, and we are willing to give our all and to contribute to a company, then as we give more and more, we will see that, in one way or another, we are promoted and our pay increases. This is true on an individual level, and it is especially so on a social level. Today, I am going to explain this principle by examining the process that takes place. The essential principle is as follows. When a factor of production is isolable, like any one of us who does not work with a partner, as Tip and Cole did, when a factor is isolable and non-specific, and thus we are useful in different lines of production, we are versatile, the market price of that factor's services tends, since all economic laws are laws of tendency, ceteris paribus, other things being equal, the price of its services tends to be equal to what we will call the discounted marginal value product. I will explain the term discounted marginal value product in greater detail in a moment, but it consists precisely of the value of our contribution to the process of production. To understand the discounted marginal value product, we will go step by step, and we will begin with the first. The first step is to understand what is meant by the term marginal physical product. The marginal physical product, MPP, is the additional quantity of a final consumer good that one additional or marginal unit of a productive factor makes it possible to generate. Imagine that 19 hours of a shoemaker's labor permit the production of 40 pairs of shoes. Now, imagine that one additional or marginal hour, instead of 19 hours, 20 hours, will enable us to produce 42 pairs of shoes. The marginal physical product in this particular example is 2 pairs of shoes. One marginal or additional hour, at the margin, permits us to produce 2 more pairs of shoes. That is the concept of the marginal physical product, the additional quantity of a final consumer good which one marginal unit of a factor of production makes it possible to generate, provided that the other factors of production remain constant, ceteris paribus, all other things being equal. We have already established that many factors play a part in the production process, But to determine the price of just one factor of production, we must imagine that the rest remain constant. The electricity, the facilities, the machine used to sew the shoes. It is only when we are considering how the market determines the price of an hour of the shoemaker's labor that we ask ourselves the question, if everything remains the same, but we add one more hour, what will the result be in terms of the final consumer good? If our answer is 2 more pairs of shoes, then that would be the marginal physical product in our example. The marginal physical product reflects the law of diminishing returns. This law states that if we have a fixed factor and a variable factor, and the variable factor gradually increases in units, then production will initially rise more than proportionally. However, there will come a point at which subsequent rises in production will be smaller and smaller. In other words, if we continue to add units, more hours of labor, although the result will certainly be greater in terms of the final consumer good, the increase in the volume of output will reach a point at which it becomes smaller and smaller. In graphical terms, though I do not like to use graphs, the curve will change from concave to convex, but we can demonstrate in strictly praxeological terms why this must be so. Now we are ready to take another step. I have explained the concept of the marginal physical product, and now we can move forward. Our second step is to understand the concept of the marginal value product. It is quite simple. The marginal value product is equal to the marginal physical product multiplied by the expected market price. If in our example, the marginal physical product is 2 pairs of shoes, what is the marginal value product? Well, if each pair of shoes is going to be priced at 50 euros, the marginal value product would be 2 for the pairs of shoes times 50, or 100 euros. In other words, this is the same idea as before, but in terms of market prices. And now we come to the third step, understanding the discounted marginal value product. Listen, the problem is that the marginal value product is not obtained now, when I am providing my services as a shoemaker. Instead, it is obtained at the end of the production process in which I take part, along with other productive factors. This process could perhaps take 6 months or a year to mature or culminate in the new shoes. So, in a year, when the production process concludes and the shoes have been produced, those 2 pairs of shoes can be sold at 50 euros, 100 euros in a year. But the worker must be paid today, since workers are paid daily, or weekly, or, as is usual, monthly. We are paid once a month for our contribution to the current production process, regardless of whether it will culminate in final consumer goods within 6 months, a year, or a year and a half. We must be paid today an amount which will only be available in a more or less distant future, let us say 1 year, to simplify the example. And as you know, the logical category of time preference is an essential principle of the production process, and inseparably linked to our human nature. According to this principle, other things being equal, human beings value the present more than the future, and as a result, a market price for present goods in terms of future goods tends to be set, and we call this price the interest rate. So, we know that if the interest rate is 10%, 100 units today will be worth 110 in 1 year. And likewise, 100 units in 1 year are today worth 100 discounted by the interest rate, so minus 10%, around 90. Since the worker must be paid today, the value of his contribution to a production process that will conclude only in a distant future, for instance, in 1 year, we must discount by the interest rate the marginal value product that will follow from the worker's contribution to the production process today, a process that will culminate only at the end of 1 year in a final consumer good which can be sold. Therefore, the amount paid to any factor of production is known as the discounted, by the interest rate, marginal value product, the value today of the present contribution of an additional unit of productive factor to the generation of a final consumer good that will be finished only after a period of time, for instance, 1 year. So, in our example, the interest rate is 10%, the marginal physical product is 2 pairs of shoes, and the corresponding marginal value product, when we sell the shoes in 1 year at 50 euros a pair, is 100 euros. And the corresponding marginal value product, when we sell the shoes in 1 year at 50 euros a pair, is 100 euros. But we must pay the worker today, and 100 euros in 1 year's time at 10% interest is worth 90 euros today. According to the law, we will tend to pay the worker, in our example, a worker specialized in the production of shoes, 90 euros. In other words, there is an inexorable law in the market which says that each of us is paid the value of our contribution, but today, that is the value, discounted by the interest rate, of the contribution we make in the form of a final consumer good that will be available only once it has been completed in a more or less distant future. What if the factors are non-isolable, like tip and coll, or cruz and raya? Well, the same law applies, but to both members jointly, as a single factor. Tip and coll, cruz and raya, or martes and trece. They jointly receive their discounted marginal value product. Someone might ask, well, how much goes to cruz and how much goes to raya? Listen, economic theory has nothing to say about that. They will enter into a contract for the pair or group of non-isolable members, and then they will have to reach an agreement between themselves. Maybe they will split the money down the middle, or maybe not, because one of them is pushier and keeps 2/3 of it for himself and forces the other to agree. What if, in the production process, there are several non-specific factors, and only one specific factor, which is useful solely in that particular line of production? The law we have explained applies to non-specific factors, versatile ones, those which can be put to several different uses. These factors tend to be paid their discounted marginal value product. Then the residual value is paid to the purely specific factor. Now I will demonstrate that this law of tendency holds true and operates in the market without anyone's direction from above, and I will demonstrate it a contrario sensu. That is, I will ask what would happen if a worker, or any productive factor, if we are discussing not the labor factor, but the rent of another productive factor, like the price of renting a computer or a tractor, what would happen if that factor were not paid what we have called the discounted marginal value product, or the present value of that factor's contribution to the process of production? In the specific case of labor, what would happen if an entrepreneur paid a worker less than his discounted marginal value product? Well, something very simple would happen. If for the additional or marginal hour of the shoemaker's labor, I pay him less than the 90 euros his work contributes for me to the production process, then clearly that marginal hour brings me a very handsome entrepreneurial profit. If I pay the worker 70 for that hour instead of 90, and he contributes to the production process 2 pairs of shoes at 50 euros a pair, 100 euros in 1 year, and the value of that contribution, discounted by the interest rate, is 90, then obviously by hiring him for that last hour, I have made a pure entrepreneurial profit of 90 minus 70, 20 euros. I have paid him less than the value of what he has produced for me. Since entrepreneurs are eager to make a profit, either I or one of my competitors will say, I am not going to stop there. Why only 20 hours? From 19 to 20. I am going to hire another unit of labor factor. In other words, 1 more hour. I made a killing on the last hour. I made a clear 20 in pure entrepreneurial profit. I am going to hire another hour. Instead of 20 hours, 21, in order to accumulate another hour's worth of profit. And if I do not do that, a competitor will. So, I hire the worker for another hour. And if the circumstances have not changed, and I can pay him another 70 euros for that additional hour, and I can again sell the shoes for 100 euros in 1 year, and their present value is 90, I will bring in another 20 euros in profit. But why stop at 21 hours? If I have just made a profit of 20 on the 20th hour, and another 20 on the 21st hour, I am going to hire him for another hour, the 22nd hour, and so on. But do you know what happens then? As I demand more and more hours of a factor's services, and here the individual determinants of price come into play, Other things being equal, as the demand for any good or factor increases, the price tends to increase. If with the additional hours I am producing more and more pairs of shoes, what do you think will happen when that growing supply of shoes, more and more units, reaches the market? Other things being equal, as the number of units for sale rises, the price tends to fall. Watch how I'm moving my hands. There will come a point when I will have to pay the worker more and more for each additional hour, and the price at which I will be able to sell each pair of shoes I put on the market will be lower and lower. Eventually, the two will coincide. In other words, for the marginal hour of labor, I will pay the worker his discounted marginal value product. But what if I make a mistake and miss the mark? And this happens frequently, because the entire market process is carried out by entrepreneurs in an environment of uncertainty, in which they attempt, by trial and error, to find the combinations which yield the largest profit. And what if I go too far? What if I have been carried away with optimism? The worker sells himself too well. I think he is going to be super productive. I overpay him. And then, when harsh reality sets in, he contributes little for me to the process of production. Or what if I make a mistake on the number of units and I go too far? What if, instead of 20, 22, 23 hours, I hire the worker for 40 hours? And for the 40th hour, I have to pay him 120 euros. The year passes, and when the shoes from that marginal hour arrive, I realize I can sell them for only 40, because the market is so flooded with shoes. 2 pairs of shoes at 40, 80 euros, and I pay the worker 120. What is the moral of the story? I am losing money on that last marginal hour of the worker's labor I have hired. That sends a message to me. Look out, you have gone too far on the volume of production. You are producing too many units. So many that you must sell them at a very low price, yet you have incurred very high costs. What is that telling me? That I must reduce the volume of production, decrease the number of units. If you go too far, you lose money, and you must cut back. If you cut back, fewer consumer goods will reach the market, and thus their price will tend to recover. Also, because you are demanding fewer hours, factors of production are freed, and therefore their price will tend to drop. So the two will tend to become equal. What is the moral of the story? The entrepreneurial drive to obtain profits determines that each of us is paid the present value of his or her contribution to the process of production. In other words, what we call the discounted, by the interest rate, marginal value product. If we fall short on the volume of production, we lose a potential profit, and our own drive to bring in more profit will lead us to hire more labor. However, it will cost us more and more, and we will be able to sell the product at a lower and lower price. How far will this go? Up to the point at which the two are approximately equal. And what if I make a mistake and go too far? The opposite will happen. The price at which I will be able to sell the consumer good will be insufficient for me to recover the cost I have incurred in paying for the services of the productive factor. This will tell me that I have gone too far on the volume, and that I must draw back or reduce the volume of production. For instance, a few years ago, General Motors was producing millions of cars, but it was going bankrupt. What did the company do? Well, it suspended payments, let half of its people go, and cut production by 30%, and the company became profitable again. It had gone too far. The price at which it could sell the marginal car was insufficient to cover all the costs. Well, with a degree in business administration and management, in the near future, you will find yourselves involved in a great variety of companies, in every part of every productive sector. And one of your essential goals will be to discover the volume of production that will enable you to generate the largest possible entrepreneurial profits without going too far, nor falling short. And as a result, each of the factors of production which contribute to that process will be paid its discounted, by the interest rate, marginal value product. Or in more colloquial terms, that marvel I talked about at the beginning of class. Each of us tends to be paid the value of what we contribute to the production process. So, if we wish to earn more money, the secret is quite simple. What we must do is contribute more and more value to the company we are involved in. That is the only way to be successful in life. Yes? You have a question? Now, when we are seeing computer prices fall dramatically, can we really say that the factor tends to be paid the value it contributes to the process of production, or is there a technological factor for innovation? Well, in economics, all laws are ceteris paribus laws, other things being equal. If we keep all circumstances equal, then each factor of production, in the case you have just mentioned, a computer, will be paid for its services its discounted marginal value product. This is called the rent of the corresponding equipment good. Many times, such goods are sold. Other times, a rental contract or lease is signed. The purchase price of the whole good, or the capital value of the good, tends to be equal to its future flow of returns. If the machine is highly productive, it will have a very high capital value. So, when entrepreneurs are studying how much it costs to produce that capital good, if they find that, due to technological innovations, etc., it costs a fraction of the good's future flow of returns, then entrepreneurs will rush in droves to produce equipment until the price rises at the margin. And because the supply is much larger, the expected revenue, or rent, falls. The same thing happened with apartments in Spain a few years back. What happened? Well, apartments had an extremely high present value, because the interest rate was virtually zero. Entrepreneurs leapt into action and said, "Hey, it is super profitable to buy land and bricks and to hire architects." So they jumped to build 1 million apartments, for which they later found out there was no demand, because the whole thing had been due to a process of artificial credit expansion and an artificial reduction in interest rates. The theory is impeccable. It explains the law of tendency, which indicates that each factor is paid the value of its contribution to the production process. However, you must consider this in the context of an overall comprehensive analysis of the economic process, and then you will understand how it works. If the machine was made by Oracle, for instance, and it is very productive, and it has a very high present value, then entrepreneurs think, let us see, what would it cost us to acquire the necessary factors of production, to build the machine, recombine them, and bring the machine to culmination? If it turns out that, due to technological innovations, etc., the cost is very low, then an enormous profit margin exists in the technology sector. Entrepreneurs will rush en masse to buy the productive factors necessary to build computers, from the services of technical engineers to silica components or whatever, and a massive quantity of new equipment will reach the market. Clearly, as a result, the marginal revenue it produces will be lower and lower, owing to the larger supply. This will continue until the marginal cost tends to equal the marginal product. With respect to both the specific case you have mentioned, computers, and the housing sector, which hits us close to home, the process I have just described can help us to understand many of our experiences. I am sure you will not have overlooked the obvious fact that a poor worker in India, for instance, who grows rice by hand in the fields, is much less productive than a worker who has capital equipment available, the most modern machines, the most modern tractor. One American farmer, with computers and a tractor, can plow and prepare many hectares in one day, but it would take hundreds of Indians to do that job virtually by hand, or with a Roman plow, in the same amount of time. The American worker, or the Swiss, the European, is much more productive than the Indian because the former has at his disposal well-invested capital machines, tools, tractors, etc. We have shown that each worker tends to be paid the value of his contribution to the production process. And since the American worker is far more productive than the Chinese or Indian worker, because the American has many more machines, he earns 100 times what the Chinese or Indian worker earns. It is not that the American is cleverer, it is not that he works more hours. He simply has available to him much more capital well invested, much more capital equipment in the form of manufacturing plants, tools, computers, software, machinery, tractors, the latest technology. So, if we wish to help poor countries and poor people out of poverty, and we wish to see them increasingly progress and prosper, it is essential that we foster the accumulation of well-invested capital. The only way out of poverty for a country or an individual is to have more capital equipment. Therefore, the fundamental secret is to encourage and protect capitalists. There is only one way to combat poverty, and that is to foster the spirit of saving and to encourage capitalists and entrepreneurs so that they will invest wisely in capital equipment. Hence, the way for a country to escape poverty is to attract savers, to attract capitalists, and to lower taxes. The capitalist and the saver are the ones who must be wooed. This flies in the face of all the demagogy we are used to. What do populists and demagogues in poor countries, like Chavez or Maduro in Venezuela or Morales in Bolivia, usually do? They harass capitalists. They paint a picture of good guys versus bad guys. And they say, it's capitalist exploiters against the poor. What have we got to do? Confiscate the property of the capitalists. Redistribute wealth. Take from some to give to others. Raise taxes. This means condemning the workers to poverty. Economic theory reveals that each worker tends to be paid the value of his contribution to the production process. And the more capital the worker uses in his daily work, the larger his contribution will be. In other words, the more productive the worker will be. But for this to occur, others must first have saved. Therefore, countries must court capitalists, encourage them to save, respect their property, and attract foreign investments. It is the capitalist we must woo and support if we wish to help workers out of poverty. And yet, I repeat, the picture painted for us, the message we hear on the street, is exactly the opposite. We have to go after the capitalist. If he has made any money, he has probably stolen it. This is a social injustice. We must take from the rich and give to the poor. If we take from the rich and give to the poor will consume what they receive, run out of capital, and be condemned to poverty. It is the story of the ant and the grasshopper, but it sells quite well, and everybody says, okay, what say we take the 100 richest people in Spain, seize their wealth, and divide it up among everybody? And everyone thinks, hey, that sounds fantastic. I will get €1,000, and with that I can buy a car, go to the movies, add on to my home. Fantastic! But let us not be fools. We must not fall for that ploy. You are university students. You are studying economic science. Many of you are young, and you are probably idealistic, and you have goals of helping the needy. But you need to know that the best, in fact the only, way to help the needy is to foster capitalism. Is that clear? And the demonstration I have just given shows this to be true. What happens when people save less? Other things being equal, the interest rate rises. There is a smaller supply of present goods, and more must be paid for them in the form of interest in the future. Workers and factors of production are paid the present value, the future value discounted by the interest rate. And if the interest rate goes up, the present value goes down. If saving decreases, wages do too, because the interest rate tends to rise, and thus the discounted value tends to be lower. This is in keeping with what I have been saying. Also, if saving increases, interest rates fall, and the discounted value is higher. Wages rise, and all of the spiritual and moral leaders who proclaim that we must redistribute the wealth to help the poor, that we must take from the rich, are utterly mistaken. They are imagining a static model, as if wealth were a given, and all we had to do was divvy up the pie. Not so, ladies and gentlemen. The social process is a dynamic process of entrepreneurial creativity. There are no givens. Everything depends on whether or not the dynamic contributors to this process are able to create new things, and thus raise the living standard of everyone. In this process, the leading role is played by the entrepreneur, who is the one we should be supporting, and also the capitalist, who saves and makes capital equipment available to workers, to make them more and more productive, and enable them to earn higher and higher wages as a result. And now we come to the last idea, that of capitalization. We have just articulated the law which determines the market price of the services of each of the productive factors. Perhaps I am an architect, and my services are highly valued, and I make a lot of money as an architect. Frank Lloyd Wright. People pay me for my services. Or think of an apartment or commercial premises, an office complex. The rent is the market price of the services those commercial premises provide. In the case of labor, this price is called a wage, and in the case of the services of capital, it is called rent, or the price of hiring a machine, for instance. We have explained how the market price of the services of each productive factor is determined, but you will have noticed that very frequently in the market we do not merely rent or hire services, though we often do. I rent the services of an Oracle or a Hewlett-Packard computer, and I make a rental payment of a certain amount each month. I rent the services of an apartment for my law office. I hire the services of Pretty Woman. I have to pay for those services, and there is a market price for them. A market price exists for all of the productive factors, for the services of the factors of production. However, very frequently, we buy and sell not merely services, but an entire capital good. I buy the apartment, or I buy a Pegaso truck. I purchase the computer. Fortunately, it has been over a century since the hateful institution of slavery was abolished, but in the past, people could purchase a slave. How is the market price determined when we buy the whole capital good and not the services? It is determined by what is known as the process of capitalization. Let us imagine that in period T1, a capital good provides value V1. In the first year, the good, an apartment, provides services which have a market price, a rent of 12,000 euros, 1,000 euros each month. Well, to arrive at the present value of V1, we discount it by the interest rate. The second year, period T2, the good provides another value. Now we can discount at source by the interest rate 2 years of value. The third year, the good provides yet another value, V3. Now we can discount at source 1, 2, 3 years, and so on, until we discount at source the value in period Tn, however long the good lasts. The sum of all the yearly rents, which are equal to the discounted marginal value products, the present values of output, is called the capital value of a good. There is a mnemonic rule to help you remember this. In the case of a capital good of indefinite duration, for instance, a natural resource factor, which is never used up, the rule is very clear. The present value, the value discounted by the interest rate, is equal to the amount of the yearly rent, R, divided by the interest rate. This is the present value, the value discounted by the interest rate of a rent that will last indefinitely, R divided by the interest rate. For example, if an apartment yields an annual rent of 12,000 euros and the interest rate is 10%, today the apartment will tend to be worth 120,000 euros. And if the interest rate drops to 5%, 0.05, the present value doubles and is equal to 240,000. If the interest rate rises, the present value falls. This rule is not accurate for non-durable capital goods, but for durable capital goods it tends to be. Future returns tend to have a very low present value, because when we discount them by the interest rate, their value drops significantly. And if we are talking about 10, 15 or 20 years in the future, durable capital goods are very similar to goods that last indefinitely, natural resources, and we can use this as a rule of thumb. It can also help us to understand how the price of the securities which represent partial ownership of capital goods is determined. That is, the price of shares on stock markets. If a share yields a dividend of 10 euros a year, and the interest rate is 10%, the share price will tend to equal 10 divided by 0.1, in other words, 100 euros. It is obvious why this is so, for if you invest 100 euros in that share, you will receive 10%. If the share price is less than 100 euros, 50 for instance, the investment in that share is a bargain, because you are buying it for 50, yet it is going to yield 10 euros in a year. Everyone will rush to make that investment. What will happen then? The share price will rise until it is more or less equal to the amount indicated by this formula. What if I pay too much? If the price of the share is 500 euros and it will yield only 10, that is a return of 2%. Investors think, There is no way I'm going to invest there where I can earn 10% on any other investment. The share price falls. So, the market price of a computer itself, rather than the services a computer provides in 1 year, tends to be determined by a process of capitalization, in which the different discounted marginal value products are totaled. These amounts are calculated for each period, and reflect a discount, at source, by the interest rate. The same applies to the price of an apartment as a whole, rather than the rent it yields, and to the price paid for a Greek slave in the slave market of ancient Rome, rather than the slave's services as a teacher. Incidentally, though slavery has disappeared, we very often calculate what our lives are worth. Imagine I make 100,000 euros a year, and let us say I am wondering how much life insurance I would have to provide for my family if something were to happen to me. Well, I would be making the very same calculation, mutatis mutandis, that I would make to determine how much a slave would cost in the ancient slave market. If something happens to me, I want my family to have enough capital so that, when invested, it will yield 100,000 euros a year. That way, even though they are very sad, and I cannot be with them or watch my children grow up, at least they will have the same income they would have had if I had been there. If the interest rate is 10%, how much capital do I need to insure? What is my life worth in economic terms? 1 million. I need to take out an insurance policy of 1 million euros. Then, if I have a heart attack, because I am fed up and my blood pressure rises, because I have to keep scolding students for talking in class and distracting me, and I expire right here in front of everyone, God forbid, my family, my widow, will receive 1 million euros. She will immediately invest it at 10%, and then at least the source of the income I was providing them as the head of the family will remain intact. So, as you can see, the process of capitalization, even applied to human beings, has enormous practical significance in many situations. Now I will make a few brief additional comments on the labor factor of production, since it is one of the most important and relevant, and also one of the most associated with conflicts and interpretative errors. Mises writes that there are 2 types of labor, introversive labor and extroversive labor. Introversive labor is performed for pleasure, for exercise, for amusement, or for some higher goal of a moral or religious nature. Clearly, introversive labor requires effort. Or do we not have to make an effort when we play a game of soccer? Or do we not sweat when we play a game of tennis? Or when, outside of our work hours, we volunteer for an NGO? Or when we paint a picture for pleasure? Does my son not spend hours and put in considerable effort when he assembles a Lego structure? Of course he does. It is simply that, on our subjective value scales, the personal satisfaction we derive from physical exercise, the triumph of coming in first in the 100-meter flat race, the aesthetic pleasure of completing a work of art, the personal satisfaction Mother Teresa of Calcutta found in having helped those most in need more than make up for the effort and sacrifice required, no matter how great. When this is the case, we do not need to be paid for the work we do. We are paid in satisfaction. This is called introversive labor. In contrast, extroversive labor entails a satisfaction which is not compensated for by inner satisfaction, but by what we obtain in the production process when we exchange the results of our services for monetary units. We place a higher subjective value on the results of the effort we sell in the production process than on lost leisure. The Bible tells us that work is toil, a kind of curse. We all share the fate of having to earn our bread by the sweat of our brows. Everyone has to make a living. And you will all have to find a way to make a living. From a subjective standpoint, we have an enormous advantage if we are able to earn our living doing something we like. That way, dear students, we are doubly paid. Not only do we receive our wages, but we also gain the inner satisfaction of a job well done, of working at something we like or feel a vocation for. As I have mentioned to you, and to the last group as well, I have a real vocation as a teacher. I love teaching, though it is very hard work. I have to spend long hours studying, writing books, and preparing my lessons beforehand. I make a major effort to transfer my knowledge to you here. I lose a kilo every time I teach a class. But I would be delighted to teach even if no one paid me for it. So, if I would teach you for free, and I might even be willing to pay you for the privilege of teaching you, and it turns out that not only do I not have to pay you, and I am delighted to teach you, but you actually pay me, I am the luckiest man in the world, because ultimately I am being paid twice. Dear students, one of the greatest tragedies of humanity, one of the most devastating effects of misguided, leftist, progressive, anti-capitalist union propaganda has been the deliberate extinguishing of that joy and pleasure which we find in the introversive part of the work we do. The mental outlook of workers has been scorned, and they have been fed the erroneous idea that they are exploited by a wicked capitalist system, and that it is only thanks to the supposed protection of the state, or unions, or other people, like moral leaders, that the poor workers can survive. And people who used to go to work happy start to go to work angry, thinking they are alienated victims of a soulless machine. Not only is this portrayal entirely inaccurate, but it is also wicked and immoral, because it poisons many workers who would go to work delighted and would be paid 2 salaries, as I am. One simply in the satisfaction of a job well done, and another in cash. To communicate to workers the idea that they are the victims of exploitation, to replace the joy of work with the aggravation of feeling exploited, is to inflict on workers one of the severest injuries that can be done to a person. Furthermore, a great many personal maladjustments result. So, today's class has been very practical. You have learned how to approach a job interview. You have learned that the more you contribute to the process of production, the more money you will make. In addition, you have learned that it is important to go to work happy, cheerful, with your head held high, because then you will be doubly paid. Your work will come out better. You will contribute more. You will earn more in cash, and you will also be happier. Your entrepreneurial ability will be important as well when it comes to deciding where you want to work. Not all companies are equal. Sometimes we must make entrepreneurial decisions in a context of uncertainty. It may take us 2 or 3 attempts, or a change in our circumstances, to find a job that is right for us. And we have to keep looking until we find one. There is no doubt about it. But do try to find happiness in what you do, because honestly, if you do, your lives will be radically different and much better than they would otherwise have been. The labor market is driven by entrepreneurs who wish to make a profit. Entrepreneurship is dispersed in the labor market as it is in any other market. Workers want to find the best position in which to provide their services, according to what they have learned, their tastes, and their vocations. And entrepreneurs are looking for worthy, young, and not so young people who have experience and can solve problems for them and be productive. There is an environment of uncertainty. Entrepreneurial creativity and the desire for profit must be sparked there. Entrepreneurs must notice profit opportunities that reflect maladjustments, a worker who is not employed where he should be, and a company that needs him. For this to happen, It is necessary that the production process be free, that the labor market be free, nimble, flexible, and not the object of intervention. However, no market is more rigid and controlled than the labor market. On the pretext of the great scientific lie that we must protect workers from capitalism, a set of pseudo-laws which make labor relations entirely rigid have been created. We cannot pay the price the market determines. Laws are established which set the minimum wage higher than the discounted marginal value product, thus making it unprofitable to hire thousands and thousands of workers, usually marginalized minorities. The parties are prevented from freely and formally agreeing on the termination process to be followed if things do not go well. We do not understand each other. The chemistry is not right. The production process is erroneous, or I have expanded too much and must draw back. I cannot freely come to an agreement with you on what the compensation will be. Instead, it is set for me from the outside. When the labor market is rigid, it does not work, and all kinds of maladjustments arise, primarily unemployment. According to Mises, there are two types of unemployment. There is what he calls catallactic unemployment. It comes from katallatein, which means to exchange in Greek. Catallaxy is the science of exchanges, a part of economic science. When catallactic unemployment occurs, people do not work, because, for one thing, many value leisure more highly than what a job would pay them, and they voluntarily decide not to work. Many vagrants. I speak from personal experience. Many people are lazy, and if we admit it, a few of us are also probably guilty of the capital sin of sloth. In other cases, people prefer to keep looking for a better job, or are unemployed simply because they lack the necessary entrepreneurial alertness to discover the best place to work. But in contrast to frictional, voluntary, catallactic unemployment, which always exists, there is another type of unemployment, which is the truly harmful type, and it is called institutional, or involuntary unemployment. This sort of unemployment arises because the state, either directly or by its minimum wage labor legislation and all it involves, uses coercion to prevent certain workers and companies from closing a deal, where the workers will be delighted to have jobs at those companies at the wages offered, and the entrepreneurs there will be delighted to hire them. The state acts in this way because those wages are lower than what the law establishes, or because the working conditions, which will be freely agreed upon without any use of force on either side, are not the ones labor legislation stipulates. When the law sets real wages higher than those the market would determine, in other words, the discounted marginal value product, when unions are granted the privilege of using violence, staging brutal strikes, and coercively preventing workers who want to work from working, and wages other than market wages are violently obtained, then immediately a very large number of workers, all of those who contribute to the production process of value lower than the wage coercively imposed by legislation, are either laid off or not hired, or both. Thus a huge volume of unemployment results. Unemployment occurs due to government and union intervention in the labor market. That is the immediate cause of unemployment, and we have already discussed it. We covered it with the corresponding chapter of my book on economic cycles. If in addition the market becomes rigid, then the entrepreneurial spirit, which springs into action to uncover mutually profitable opportunities for workers and entrepreneurs, is blocked. In the Spanish labor market, for instance, private employment agencies have been prohibited in the past. The market has been monopolized by the State Employment Service or the National Employment Institute. Only marginally the use of headhunters, entrepreneurs who search for people with certain talents and skills, is permitted to the directors of large companies, and there is no unemployment there. Also, agencies may perhaps operate in the domestic service sector, and there is no unemployment there either. Unemployment exists where there are supposed labor laws designed to protect workers. These invariably do harm, especially to the most disadvantaged, those who contribute least to the production process, because they are young, they lack experience, they are entering the labor market for the first time, they are marginalized minorities, or immigrants, or women who need to coordinate their work inside and outside of the home. All of the workers who contribute less than the amount established by labor legislation in the form of cash wages, particularly when we consider the cost, which is also discounted, of all the confrontational rigidity that labor legislation generates, are placed at a disadvantage, and unemployment soars. Notice what a big lie all labor legislation is. Workers tend to be paid the value of their contribution to the production process, their discounted marginal value product, no more, no less. But that money paid to the worker is not what he takes home. The worker takes home a significantly smaller part of what he costs the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur pays him. As workers, what we take home is our net wage, after a number of discounts, Social Security, for example. And someone might say, "No, Professor, you are mistaken, because in Spain, a worker's Social Security contribution is only 6% of each monthly salary. Meanwhile, we have gotten the entrepreneur to pay 30%, and we have made other social gains as well. Paid vacations. I work 11 months, and then when August rolls around, I'm off to the beach, and my boss keeps on paying me." That is a lie. It is all a big ruse, and our mission is to proclaim this again and again to workers in society. The entire cost of Social Security, to the very last cent, including the 30% the entrepreneur covers, almost 1/3 of our earnings, is paid exclusively by the worker. Every joyful moment we spend at the beach, thinking we are on a vacation paid for by the entrepreneur, is not what we think. The money does not come out of the entrepreneur's pocket. The worker pays for every last moment. The famous bonus paychecks come entirely out of the worker's pocket. What happens in the market in terms of economic theory? It is quite simple. Each of us is paid the discounted value of our marginal product, period. And if we work 11 months, we are paid our discounted marginal value product based on 11 months of work. It is just that, owing to the great lie of labor legislation, the amount we contribute over 11 months, which is what we receive, is divided by 14. And each month that we do not receive bonus pay or spend on vacation, we are paid less than we have contributed. The months we do receive bonus pay, we are receiving the amount we were not paid the months we got just one paycheck. And in vacation months, we receive 1/11th of the amount that has been withheld from the 11 months we have worked. So the worker pays it all, to the very last cent. It is a lie to say the money comes out of the pocket of the entrepreneur. Economic theory demonstrates this, and it is essential that workers have this knowledge, because if they were aware of what is happening, circumstances would change radically. Do you think workers would permit 1/3 of their wages to be withheld for public social security if they knew that with that money they could buy better private health care and invest in a private pension plan that would give them a more secure retirement with money left over, instead of supporting a bunch of comfortable civil servants, services, lines and waiting lists, etc.? And many of us would say, particularly newlyweds with expenses to meet, "I do not wish to spend a month on vacation, especially if I am paying for it myself. I would rather take just 2 weeks off, because I need the money." And nowadays, if you are caught working for someone else, that is a crime. The entrepreneur is fined, and you are too. Compulsory vacation time is coercively imposed on workers. But it is all disfigured with the great lie of a social struggle or social gains, as if the money were taken from capitalists. One does not have to be Einstein or attend Professor Huerta de Soto's economics classes to understand this. But certainly, now that we have studied the labor market and how wages are determined, we must better understand it. The discounted marginal value product, which the entrepreneur pays, is the total labor cost of a worker to the entrepreneur. And it would be all the same to the entrepreneur if, instead of paying 30% of a worker's salary to the social security system, he gave it to the worker and let the worker sort it out for himself and do whatever he pleased with the money. Instead of paying for 11 months' work in 14 payments, the entrepreneur would just give the worker the money. Listen, I will pay you monthly for each of the 11 months, and your monthly pay will be higher. And when August arrives, if you wish to go on vacation, I will not pay you. And if you wish to stay, I will pay you and you will earn more. Each party would freely decide what he wished to do. But no, ladies and gentlemen, Papa State thinks himself superior to us, and he coercively and dictatorially imposes our way of life on us. And instead of doing so openly, he does it by deceiving the citizenry and presenting his scheme under the guise of a social gain that comes at the expense of entrepreneurs, when that is not the case. I repeat, it would be the same to the entrepreneur if, instead of paying that part of the labor cost to the social security system, or putting it into a little fund to pay for the month of August, he gave it to us in a timely manner. And we, being grown-ups, and living in a democratic regime and electing our own authorities, decided how we wanted to spend our own money. Therefore, economic theory and good sense suggest that we dismantle all labor legislation, because it is, in its entirety, detrimental to workers. Labor laws seriously harm those they supposedly favor, and that is a grandiose case of hypocrisy and immorality. Furthermore, they generate an enormous volume of unemployment. The guilt for unemployment lies with all the labor legislation passed ostensibly to protect the worker. This is truly outrageous. It is one of those scientific discoveries that make one indignant. We should cry out in all the spheres in which we have a voice, our families, our circles of friends, on the street, in the future when we have responsibilities, for openness, truth, and light in this area. Whenever there is a desire to impose, the idea is very simple. People say, there is poverty. Well, let us establish a minimum wage. It is the most obvious solution, right? Since no one can live on less than 600 or 1,000 euros a month, we will set a minimum wage. That is a poisoned gift. All of the workers who contribute less than the minimum to the process of production are not hired, and those who have a job but produce less than the minimum are laid off at the drop of a hat. The result? Unemployment. Another idea that comes up, women are paid less than men. Let us establish the same pay for both. Well, if that is true, there may be a reason for it. But you are dooming to unemployment all of those women who wish to coordinate their work lives with their family lives, and thus do not contribute as much as their male counterparts. So what happens? No one hires them. Unemployment. The same happens to immigrants. If there are 5 million unemployed in Spain, twice as many as in the other countries in its economic area, that is because the labor legislation in Spain is much more protective of workers. What a paradox! So, is Professor Huerta de Soto the only one who knows this? Everyone knows this. Union leaders, politicians, economic theorists, everyone. It is just that society is living a big lie, and nobody dares to bell the cat. Everyone knows that now we must liberalize the labor market in Spain to absorb the 5 million unemployed, but no one dares to do it. Elected officials believe that the moment they propose or adopt such a measure, they will lose the elections. And the next time you find yourselves in a discussion about whether it is necessary to liberalize dismissal in Spain, you will already know the answer. Yes. I do not mean free dismissal, but dismissal on the terms freely agreed to by both parties. That should not be legislated.